Hey all, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking a first look at the Hello X2, an interesting gadget that clips onto the side of your laptop display and transforms a regular screen into a touchscreen, which is a very neat idea and works all the way up to 27-inch monitors. Now, the reason why this is a first look and not a full review is because this is a pre-production prototype, and this will actually be hitting Indiegogo as a crowdsourcing campaign project soon, so it needs to hit a certain goal for it to be mass-produced, and so some of the software and parts are still in the early days. Works with both Windows and macOS. It'll retail for around $100. Now I have to point out that this isn't the first time that we've seen a gadget that can transform a regular screen into a touchscreen, the first one being the AirBar by Neonode. This one uses a pretty similar concept. It's also plug and play. However, the Neonode AirBar is a little more expensive, and also it's not as easy to adjust. They sell it in preset sizes for displays of 15.6 inches, 14 inches, and 13.3 inches. But if your screen is larger than that, or if you want to switch back and forth between different devices, there's no way to do that. Basically, the bar's length is the length of the display, versus this, which again clips onto the right edge of the screen, and it can work with pretty much any screen size, so you have expanded versatility. The pre-production packaging looks like has all of these little intricate digits on here that says X, and we have some of the specs printed on the back here actually. Display should be at least 10 inches in terms of size, and some of the accessories that's included. In the box, aside from the module, the X2 sensor itself, we also get some additional accessories. That includes a second clamp that you can switch out the existing one for if you have a different thickness for your display monitor. If it's a little bit thicker versus the one here is meant more for thinner computers. There's a user manual, but the manual is pretty scarce in terms of instructions. So there's actually more documentation available from their website that includes downloading the drivers. You also get this interesting looking square part that's used for calibration. Because this can be used for any screen size, it needs to recognize how large your monitor is, and how it does this is using this little module here. There's basically 3 bulbs which detects the infrared light which is cast by this little sensor part. It will then detect how long it is, and then you put it onto the vertical axis and you do it one more time so it can automatically sense the distance and you can make those calibrations. And finally, there is the cable which you use to connect the sensor onto your computer. It's made out of metal and also has the Hello X logo embedded onto it, takes a micro USB for data. So taking a closer look at the design of the X2, the body here is made out of a fusion between polycarbonate plastic and also aluminum alloy, so it feels pretty sturdy in terms of the build. The overall accenting here with the gold and black does look pretty fancy and makes it seem more expensive than the price would suggest. In terms of the sensors, we have the infrared one, and then there's another camera sensor here that can probably also be used to detect your position on the display. So this one here is more for detecting the size of the screen, and this is more for detecting the position of when you're touching, which is kind of interesting. And otherwise, the side here features the micro USB port for plugging it into the computer, and then we have what looks like a series of different knobs that may seem complicated at first, but it's actually a pretty simple process. The one that juts out on the rear here is really meant for the clamp, because again, it works with universal laptops. Whenever you want to put it onto the laptop's display, your laptops may have different thickness, so you can kind of loosen it up and make it tighter so that it clamps shut onto the screen and doesn't move around. And then the 2 other knobs here are used for adjusting the virtual touchscreen size. So again, after you calibrate it, you can also kind of make the distance virtually a little bit shorter or longer by using the knob here, and also here for the other axis. The concept is extremely cool, although there's also a few downsides to keep in mind. Although it's more versatile than the Neonode AirBar, it's also requiring a little more setup, I'd say, because the AirBar is pretty much because it's one size, just for one type of laptop. You plug it in, you put it onto the bottom, and it's ready. This one requires you to clamp it on and then also make a few adjustments. But overall, I think the trade-off is worth it if you plan on using it for a variety of laptops or monitors. So here's what the Hello X2 looks like when I have it clamped onto the side of your laptop. And fear not, if your computer has different sizes in terms of the thickness of the bezel, the software also will support that and offer a few different compatibility modes. and then after a few seconds it should say device connected. The driver again can be downloaded from their website. It's called Hello X, and afterwards it will also show you a little status notification light down below on the taskbar, whether it's calibrated, whether it's turned on, if it's working or not. And then from here we can bring up some adjustment modes. The style of the display that we are using, so the software can recognize that. Displays which have a smaller bezel, which have a thinner bezel or larger one can be chosen here. And if you tap on a style here, it will then prompt you to calibrate the dimensions or size of your display. That infrared sensor is pretty visible on camera, even though right now it's really not visible to the human eye. And again, it's how this little square module will respond to it. But after which point you put it onto the positions, which are indicated by the kind of device here onto these spots, and then you have to twist the knobs that we saw previously until the light here turns green. I've already calibrated it, so it seems to be good, but if the dimensions, for instance, is off, you'll get a different color light, like a blue or red light, which means that the kind of knob needs to be further adjusted. So once this part turns green, you're able to proceed to next and put it into the other spot here. And once again, after the lights turn green, that means it's properly calibrated and you've twisted the knobs on the sensor to correctly align for the length of the display, and tap on finish. After which point you can jump into kind of the calibration step, which will bring up the virtual spots, and then you can tap on it with your fingers, after which point the touch will be ready. And one thing I want to point out here is this is definitely in the early days in terms of the software, because as we saw here, there's even a few typos in the language here, but hopefully, again, this will be refined as it releases into the mass market. But anyways, we can see some of the functions here in terms of a more virtual walkthrough, how to touch it with your finger versus if you are trying to kind of touch multiple spots at once, it tends not to work. So this is not a sensor that will support multi-touch, unfortunately. It's one point using this solution. And you should also be in a relatively well-lit environment. If it's too dark, the sensor may also have a few issues. A speed walk of the entire setup process. A few things I will say though is, again, this is a early prototype model, and I have encountered one instance where I was using a different computer where kind of the setup seemed to be a bit more tricky. The drivers weren't completely ready, I think, in that case, and the kind of proceeding through certain steps would often be a little bit difficult. So there's definitely a few bugs here that are still being resolved, but the overall kind of hardware at least does seem like a very good implementation of a camera and infrared sensor. So as far as making sure it works with all of the computer types as well as the kind of all machines, that's the consistency part, which the drivers and software still needs to be ironed out, but afterwards we are going to be able to just again use it as advertised as kind of a touchscreen method of input, which again could be fun if you're doing things like maybe presentations or playing back a few games. It offers a different way to interact and does work reasonably well for a single point of input. The concept, more than anything, which I think is really exciting, and kind of reusing these common parts into something that is pretty cool. You can see the infrared light here again, which is completely invisible to the human eye, but the camera is picking up really nicely. It's actually a very cool effect. You can see how it's able to kind of detect the size of the display. So that's been just our hands-on first look kind of unboxing of the Hello X2. So you can check out more details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. It's been the first look at the Hello X2.